So today I want to share with you guys some of my secret tree planting tips that's going to give you a lot more success, healthier trees long term. And these are techniques that you've probably never heard of before, definitely not all of them. So these are things I've learned just from planting trees for over a decade and from talking and taking classes from orchardists that have been doing this for decades. So this is kind of a compilation of all these different things I've learned over the years. So today we're going to be planting probably a 2-year or 3-year-old tree planted in a pot. This is not the most ideal. What I recommend that you do is plant bare root trees in the spring or late winter. That is the best way to get trees onto your property, because what does a plant do when it's in a container? It measures it out and tells the plant, okay, this is the maximum size that we have to grow. We're gonna set up shop in here. So when you do this and then you put this into a hole, now it has to figure that all out and realize that it can go a lot further out, and it just sets the tree back. So I'll always recommend that you plant a bare root when you can. Now, I had a couple trees that died. I tried to get them to live going into the next year. They didn't, so time to replace them. This is another big secret that a lot of people aren't gonna tell you, especially if you're buying trees from them, right? You're gonna lose 20–30% of your fruit trees over a 5 to 10 year period. Whether that's from gophers, disease, you didn't plant it in the right spot, the planting hole doesn't drain well, plant gets attacked by Japanese beetles, destroys the growth, you don't get good flowering and pollination because the variety that you bought, like I did, my cherries, they flower too soon, or the stone fruit that you bought, they flower too soon, so a lot of that gets hit by a frost and you lose that fruit for the season, so you think, I need to put a new species in. Anyways, there's so many different reasons why you might replace a tree. So I want to warn you that, this was a $38 tree here. You're going to spend anywhere from $20 to $50 on a tree probably. So it's a money and time investment. And that's why I'm teaching you guys all these little tricks that can help you have a better tree. If gophers are a major concern for you, you could dig this hole out a lot deeper and put some gopher wire chicken netting in there, and it will help protect the main root ball from them. And then you want to make sure that it's a mesh, a 1 inch or a ½ inch mesh, so that the roots can all pass through it. Don't do some 1/4 inch hardware cloth where these larger roots won't be able to pass through and you're gonna mess up your tree. So the first thing I did with planting, guys, I put water in this hole. When I dug the hole, super dry. Oh, and by the way, this is my favorite planting tool of all time, one of my favorite farming tools of all time that I found recently. It's one of these big electric augers. I no longer dig holes for trees or anything anymore. I just use this thing, and I'm in love with it. So if that's something that's in your budget, and you dig a lot of holes, I highly recommend one of these things. So the first thing I did was add water to the hole. There's a couple reasons for this. You want to check the drainage. Is this hole going to drain water well? If you put water, fill this up, and you come back the next day, 12 to 24 hours, and there's still water in that hole, that's not a good sign. Almost all fruit trees, they don't like wet feet, which means they don't like to have their roots wet for an extended period of time. You may be on top of a clay pan or a rock shelf or something that's not allowing this to drain. If you see that, don't plant the tree there. Because more than likely, it's gonna die. As part of that test, I added water. What else did I add? I also added a little bit of inoculant, minerals, tiny bit of compost. And I did that so that that water would carry all of those microbes and nutrients deeper down into the ground so that this tree has something to search after when we plant this. So now we're gonna get into some planting strategies here and why we want to plant a certain way. You might see some people recommending plant a huge hole, stuff it full of compost and good nutrients, and then plant your tree into that. Don't do that. I don't recommend that you do that. Could you have a successful planting and it could work out? Yeah. If you make a planting hole and you have all the nutrients, all the good stuff, everything, all the moisture right where the plant wants it, and on the other side of that soil is total garbage, really hard for the roots to penetrate, no nutrients, hard for water to stay there, what is that tree gonna naturally wanna do? It's just gonna wanna stay in this super easy place where it's got everything. But a tree, we want roots to go as deep, as wide and deep as possible. That's gonna create the healthiest, most robust tree. So is doing that strategy gonna provide that for the tree? No. This is why I recommend when I talk about watering trees or vegetables and things, that you water it deeply but less often, and that is training the plant to go deeper and wider and go search out water and nutrients. So we want to set the tree up for that. The tree is an even better example than an annual, right? Because this root system is permanent, it's a perennial, it's not coming out. So I've planted lots of trees where I never added anything other than just some minerals and inoculant in the hole as some just initial nutrition. But I've gone a bit further now where I like to add a little bit of compost in there. So basically it's just the idea of like a starter feed, just an initial burst of nutrition for the tree when it gets into the hole, that it has some things initially. It'll reduce the transplant shock and allow the tree just to set up its defenses better. It'll have more access to things rather than trying to mine it from this crappy ground that I know that I have. One major thing you need to know in planting is the grafting location. Almost all modern fruit trees that you're gonna buy today are grafted, which means there is a root stock and a scion wood, a fruiting stalk. So there's the lower part of the tree has more vigor, is bred for more vigorous roots, disease resistance. The top is the fruiting wood, the yellow delicious apple. That has the genetics for that. You do not want to bury the graft point. Okay, that could kill your tree. You're gonna notice where that graft point is by, usually there's a bunch of wrinkles. It looks like a healed scar. And typically you will also see a growth point that they had cut. Now this is a tall tree, guys, so I have to be careful. I want to plant this as deep as possible, but because this is so tall, I have to stake this tree so that when wind comes, it's not gonna bowl it over. You know, this is probably 8 feet, and I'm only gonna get about 14 inches in the ground, so it's gonna be a little top heavy. If you have a hole that is really hard pan clay, so when you put your shovel in, it becomes this incredibly smooth surface. I recommend that you break that up with the shovel like this and put some cracks into it, put some texture into that, because if you dig out that hole and it's perfectly smooth on the inside like that, the roots will try to penetrate and just kind of bounce off and spiral into that hole, almost like they're living in a pot. So if you have that really hard clayey ground that I'm describing, texturize it, and that'll help the roots to get in there and start to work in that more difficult ground. So before we plant, we're just gonna add some of that nutrition that I talked to you guys about. First thing is just some compost that I made that I store in my woods here in the trees. So some of those forest microbes are going to get in there and inoculate this compost. So it'll be a bit more of a fungal compost. And that was just made from rabbit manure, hay, sheep manure. Then I have my inoculant here that also has minerals. It has worm castings from SD Microbes, which you can buy on my website. It has indigenous microorganisms 4, which is a highly fungal compost, and that's from Korean natural farming. So if you may not have this, of course, right? What are some other things that you could add in here? Well, compost is fantastic, guys. Compost is an inoculant, it's a fertilizer, it has organic matter, it has everything in it if you've made a high quality compost. So doing that will really help. Another thing that I recommend that you add if you have access to it is leaf mold soil. Just wipe off the top layer of leaves and scoop up that top half inch of soil there. That is gonna have an incredible amount of microbes, nutrients, and all that good stuff that's going to help. If you don't have access to mycorrhizae fungi, that is some of the inoculant that I put in here. So you could buy mycorrhizae fungi. These are fungi that develop relationships with the roots to help communicate with all the soil microbes and transport nutrients and all that stuff. So buying some of that, and I'll put some recommendations in the video description of all of that. I'll put the exact ratio of what I created here with my minerals. All that will be in the video description. It's just easier to show you guys that, and then you can decide what you want to use on your own farm or garden. and you can apply these patterns and concepts that I'm telling you to what you have. So I did 2 handfuls of my compost. I've got 1 handful of that IMO 4, which actually has IMO 5 in it as well, which is a really strong fertilizer. So that's why I'm not adding too much in there. I also have kelp meal, azomite for minerals, all that good stuff. So okay, we're pulling this out, and it's not anaerobic. Anaerobic smell would mean it's lacking oxygen. It would have a stinky, poopy smell. It does not have that. That's really good. If you smelled that on your tree, I'd be a little worried. I'd want to dry it out. Now there is another technique. I filmed the video, but I just never uploaded it. But there's another technique, tree planting technique. You can actually take off all this soil as if it's a bare root and soak this, let it dry out, and then soak it for 12 hours. It'll soak in all those nutrients, and then you plant the tree. I'll have to show you guys that in another video, but that's a really cool planting technique as well. So I'm just gonna kind of break up this outside a bunch, and what I'm doing is just loosening the roots so that they can go out and do their job. This is not gonna hurt the tree by doing this. Okay, we're just loosening things, getting it unlocked. Do it gently, you're not trying to break roots. So something like this. Okay, I don't want a bunch of this in there. I got see those yellow pellets? That's a chemical fertilizer. We don't want that. And then what I like to do, even with my bare roots, I will take my inoculants, minerals, and I'll just do a dusting over the root ball like this. Next thing, the graft point, guys. The graft point should be pointing towards the north. You just don't want a lot of sunlight on that. That's the idea behind it. It's just a weaker point of the tree, so face it away from the sunlight. And then I'm also judging the height right here, guys. I'm just putting my hand on the top of the soil, going across. That's about even with the top of the soil, which for an apple tree, that's what we're looking for. A cherry tree, you actually want to plant it a little bit up out of the planting hole and kind of mound it. But most fruit trees, you can go completely even. And I'm actually going to bring this up slightly with some of the native soil. I'm worried that the graft isn't going to be high enough. So now here you've got 2 options. You could just fill this back in with the native soil, or you could backfill this with all compost, or you could backfill it with native plus compost. Like I was describing before, not to add too much nutrition in the hole. And part of that reason is because I'm going to feed nutrition from the top by putting compost on the top, mulch on the top. We can feed liquid fertilizers from the top. And just the concept behind that, guys, is mimicking nature, right? What is happening in the forest? Is somebody fertilizing the forest? No. All the decomposition of the forest floor, there's animals, there's leaves, all of that is being decomposed by the microbes. Rain is sending that down into the ground. And so that's why I do it like this, because I'm mimicking that process. So I'm just gonna take some of my compost here, dump it. Should have done this beforehand, but I'm just gonna mix it up right here. Kind of incorporate it into the native soil. Right. So now, this part's really important. If you have somebody else to help you, that's always nice. I want to make sure that this tree is standing as straight as possible. And then I'm going to take my foot and lightly compress down the dirt. This is to remove all the air pockets in here. If roots hit an air pocket, they'll die. So this is why we're removing this. Watering and immediately afterwards is also going to do that. And planting it straight is really important, guys, because once this thing locks in, it's really hard to move it. So get that good position, and then we're gonna stake this guy down. Because this has synthetic fertilizer, all this leftover, I could use this as a mulch, but honestly, I don't like the synthetic fertilizer, so we're just gonna throw this onto my grass. We're gonna feed from the top. So this final layer here that we give this is going to be compost. We'll do a little bit more inoculant fertilizer, minerals. What's the final step, guys? What's one of the most important things we can do? We need to cover our soil. So let's get some mulch on here, and that's gonna help to retain all that moisture. We'll do a full 5 gallon of wood chips, and Here's the really important thing to know about wood chips, that you're gonna see a lot of professionals do wrong a lot, which is, have you ever been to the parkway or whatever in town, and you'll see all these trees and they've got all this real nice mulch piled up like a volcano up onto the tree? Don't do that. This is actually going to possibly cause disease to the tree and even kill it. So what you actually want to do is make a donut, not a volcano. So now we've got a real nice container for when we water, so that all of those nutrients go straight down into that hole. I'm on a slight hill here, and this soil's not amazing, so water does run off. So having a donut mulch like this really helps, even in rains, to collect more of the water. I like to really water the donut and get it super wet. This will just start the breakdown process of the chips, and if you have a lot of wind in your area, it'll help it from blowing away. Now, what kind of chips can you use? You can use any hard or softwood chip, really. This is pine, that's fine. There's a few allelopathic trees out there. If you're concerned about, getting a certain type of mulch, then just do a quick Google search for your local area on, what are the dangerous types of wood that you wouldn't want to use in a garden, which there are very, very, very few. Now when I go to water this, I'm going to water this on a really slow drip like this. If I leave it on full blast, most of that water is going to run away. So let's go over some options for staking. So you could of course use a T-post, which I'm probably going to have to default to because my ground is way too hard right now. We haven't had rain in over 2 or 3 weeks. But if your ground is soft, using one of these as a stake is really fantastic. It's just treated pine from Home Depot, and it is like $1.50 for one of these, and it's like a pre-done stake ready to go. So I'd recommend that. You could just drill a hole through it and then tie a string, and that'll just prevent the trees and a really bad wind from being whipped over or branches being broken. And this is going to be a way better example here. This is my tallest tree. It's over 10 foot. About 10 foot tall, so this is way too tall of a tree. I normally never want to buy a tree that's this tall, and I love bare roots, but this is what we did. So I need to push it back so it's about here, right? So it's straight. So what I've done, and I'm just going to give you guys concepts, and you guys use what you have available to you. I got this strong nylon stuff for free somewhere. Now what I'm going to do, I'm not going to tie a knot around the tree. If you forget to take this off someday, it could girdle the tree and damage it. So it's much better if you do it like I'm going to show you. So no knot. We're going to wrap around a really strong part of the branch right before this Y split, essentially, which next year I'm going to want to prune this actually and make it a single central leader. And I'll do that in winter, but so all I'm going to do is send a screw through this. And now I can pull it tight, tie this around, I'll tie to my stake, and then that will hold it into position. So the reason I like this more than a piece of string is that these are wide and they're not going to dig into the tree at all. This is much gentler. So now that I move the tree like that, I just want to let's compress it a little bit more, get it to hold in that spot. One stake is probably going to be enough for me. I don't have a high wind situation. 2 stakes would be even better and would be more safe and guaranteed. 3 stakes is the ultimate. So you've got a triangle 3 ways holding it. If you've got insane winds on your property or no windbreak, do 3 stakes to prevent your tree from dying. But for me, this is going to work out fine, and this stake will remain here for probably a year or 2. So next summer, probably, I'll probably wait till next fall, once all the foliage falls off, next winter, I'll try to untie this and see what happens. Does this want to move back, or has it locked itself into position and now it's firm, it's got its foundation, and I can remove the stake. So now over the next day or 2, I'm going to add liquid nutrients to all of my trees, and I just watered all of them extremely deeply. And then after that is when I want to add my liquid fertilizer. These trees were really dry. If I would have just added my liquid fertilizer while the ground was a little hydrophobic, a lot of that could have just sat at the top and then washed away when I added the rest of the water. If you water first and get the ground really soaked, that will actually attract and absorb other water and nutrients more easily, and it'll be able to pass down through it. So that's why I like to kind of pre-moisten that soil so that it will accept all of the things that I want to give to it next. If you want to learn more from me and find out about different educational things I will have going on in the future, sign up for my email list down below.